Hey, Discern listeners, I thought I would answer patron emails, so let's get to it. This email is from patron Matt from Minneapolis. He says, Hey Kirk, I just finished listening to your Duty to Warn deep dive and found it fascinating and very informative. I was wondering if duty to warn and protect standards could be applied if a patient uttered and showed serious intent to falsely accuse their partner of a crime, physical or sexual abuse, for example, that they didn't commit. Do you think this hypothetical would meet the standards? End of email. Yeah, so for you listeners, if you want to listen to my ethical deep dives on duty to warn, duty to protect, I would listen to those episodes. It's pretty complicated. It depends on jurisdiction and on case law, and there's a lot of uncertainty because these things aren't clearly delineated for us as clinicians. But to contemplate your question, my first reaction is no. If I had a client tell me that they had a plan to accuse their, say it's a husband and he plans on he knows that he's going to lie to the authorities and say that his wife physically abused him. He's going to call the police like they're going through a divorce. It's a custody case or something like that. And he's planning on doing that. Would I consider that to be a duty to protect issue? No, because it doesn't alert me to some serious bodily harm, right? It's a serious issue, and of course, I would talk with the client a lot about how they shouldn't be doing that. I mean, even if the client isn't necessarily asking me for that kind of feedback, that's just a moral issue that as a human being, never mind that I'm a therapist in that moment, as a human being, I'm not going to just stand by and watch someone do that. Now, let's say you have a scenario where the husband has convincingly told me, maybe even I have corroborating evidence and reports stating that the wife is massively abusive to the kids, but has gotten off scot-free, and so the husband has to lie to get custody of the kids or something. I don't know. I don't run into those situations ever, or at least to my memory. So I don't know what I'd do. But could I wonder about my duty to protect in this situation? And sure, this is such a rare circumstance that I would absolutely call my attorney and ask her what she thought about it. And if you have a good attorney who knows what they're doing in the area of clinical malpractice, then they will just walk through all the different laws and case precedent and ethical codes and considerations. And you, of course, document all that. And maybe in the end, the lawyer and I would conclude that this was necessary for me to report. For example, if that did come up, I guess the justification, and I would tell the client this, I would say, look, you told me last session that you were going to falsely accuse your wife of sexually abusing your kids or physically abusing you or the kids or something. And I thought about it. I asked my attorney, I consulted, and under normal circumstances, I would uphold confidentiality, of course, because that is a value and an ethical code. But in this circumstance, I believe that I have a duty based on court precedent and ethical codes, and also just morally speaking, to do what I can to stop you from doing that. Now, if you can convince me that you're not going to do it, then I won't have to take action like this. But if you continue to go down this road of planning on making this false allegation, and you refuse to refrain from doing it, I will have to call who would I call? I guess I'd call the partner, because you can't call the police on someone I guess you could if it was a police report that my client was making, for example. I guess I would call the police and say, by the way, my client made this false allegation. I know it's false because the client told me that they were going to make a false allegation. And the reason why I am compelled to do this, not only for moral grounds, but also because I have a duty to protect. And if you made this allegation, there's a chance that this other individual, because of a false allegation, could go to prison for a long time and be physically harmed. And so I'm interpreting the case precedent of duty to protect in that way. So, end of role play. Does that sound right to me? No. Might I still do that anyway and not actually invoke the duty to protect? Might I just say, look, I just can't stand by and have you do this. And I suppose if you want to sue me because I broke confidentiality, then I guess I'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But I can't stand by and watch you make this false allegation. I don't know. I've been in similar situations. Like I'll have a client that's cheating on their spouse, for example, and I am inside feeling morally torn because I don't want that harm to happen to their partner. And so, I mean, what I always will say, and I'll say this to the client, it's like you either, in order to have integrity, it depends on what word they use, but if for example, the client tends to use the word integrity, I would say in order to uphold your own integrity and your own vision of yourself as a good human being, you either have to tell your partner that you're doing this, or you have to divorce your partner, or you have to break up with the cheating person. You have to stop cheating and start repairing your relationship. But you can't just continue in this zone where you're married and tricking your partner and cheating and just staying in that limbo. You're causing tremendous harm for everyone, including yourself. It's just not a good system. Maybe polyamory is an answer. I don't know, but you can't stay in this zone. So I have had that conversation. I don't know if I'd say you can't stay, but I would be pretty pointed, and I have. I don't know how many other therapists do this. I have a suspicion, anecdotally anyway, that I'm a bit of a rare person in this way, but I don't just stand by and watch people do things that are destructive to other people. I'm not going to reject the client. I'm not going to chastise the client. You could argue, I guess I'm kind of judging them, but I'm not judging their personality. I'm judging their behavior. I'm calling their behavior what it is. It's harmful. It's immoral. It's wrong to knowingly harm another human being. It's just wrong. And cheating is knowingly doing something that is harming another human being. It depends, right? If the cheating partner is being abused by their partner, there are circumstances where I wouldn't consider it as much of a moral problem or even a moral problem at all. But in the classic cheating scenario, it's immoral. It's wrong. It'd be the same as if a client told me that they were stealing from their partner or pushing their partner down the stairs or neglecting their kids on purpose or something. There's just things that I'm going to say because it's just, I just can't stand by and watch bad things. If a client says something racist or sexist, I'll just call it out. And if that sacrifices their relationship and they don't want to talk with me again, then that's fine. But that's not usually, I've never had that happen. I would gauge the relationship strength. I would choose my words carefully. I'd choose my tone carefully. And in my experience, it deepens the relationship because they know that I'm being honest with them. They know that I'm authentic and I'm real. And I'm trying to make them a better person. I'm trying to make them live a life that is more in line with their values, with integrity and love and compassion and health. But anyway, getting back to your question, I don't think duty to protect applies there. But you could make an argument that it does. All right, this next question is from patron Calvin. He writes, how have social media communities like Tumblr influenced self-harm among adolescents? End of question. Well, I don't know the research. I'm sure there is research on this, but I do know that non-suicidal self-injury or self-harm is influenced by peers. It can be influenced by societal norms. For people who are susceptible to this coping technique or behavior, acting out behavior, if they see it in other people, they're more likely, according to science, to do it themselves. And also, on the opposite side of the coin, if no one around them is doing it and they're doing it, they're more likely to try to stop. But there are many more factors that are at play when people engage in non-suicidal self-injury that have nothing to do with influence from the outside or social media. Usually people use non-suicidal self-injury because they are suffering greatly emotionally, and they've tried a lot of different things to reduce that emotional pain, and it's real pain. The emotional pain is the same center in the brain that is involved in physical pain. So, it's very, very painful, emotional pain, and it's ongoing, and it's plaguing, and, they try all sorts of things. They try, I don't know, deep breathing. They try therapy. They try maybe even medication. They try relaxation or something. Nothing seems to work. Hanging out with their friends, dressing more, they might think, well, if I have more acceptance from my peers, maybe I'll feel better about myself. That doesn't work. And then they hear about it or they just stumble upon it, that cutting or other kinds of self-injury will temporarily change the brain chemistry, or at least it'll distract them from their pain or relieve their pain temporarily. It's not something that they're in love with. They're not like, yay, I want to do this. It's out of desperation. So when these individuals get the treatment that they deserve, then they no longer need non-suicidal self-injury. Now, it can become addicting, and that's an issue. I've treated many people with NSSI and successfully helped them to kick the habit and get the trauma treatment that they need. It can take years and years, of course. And there are also a very small set of people who engage in this who are doing it because other people are doing it. They think that it's cool or whatever. That's a very, very small percentage. A lot of people think that's the majority of people, but it's not, according to science. I don't know the exact percentage, but you're talking on the order of like 3% or something. Pretty low amount of people who engage in NSSI are doing it because they're trying to fit in. And in my experience, the people that are doing it for that reason, they are doing it very briefly and superficially because they don't really have a need for it. And there's a lot of consequences to doing it. There's pain, there's blood, there's possible infection, scarring. So they're not willing to have those consequences just to fit in, so they might engage in some mild scratching or something, and it'll just last for maybe a few months. It's just a phase they're going through typically. So could Tumblr influence people in both those ways? Yeah, I could see that absolutely happening. I don't know the data on it off the top of my head, though. And I could see it going one of two ways on social media, places like Tumblr, in that people might be legit suffering, and as a part of their therapy or a part of their raising awareness about something, they might talk about NSSI, non-suicidal self-injury, as a educational tool or just as a vlog, or it's just part of their life that they're talking about among all the other things they're talking about in their life, and that could influence. But there's also social media accounts where people purposely will create accounts to talk about this sort of stuff. That's their whole reason for being on social media, is not only talking about this one thing, NSSI, but also potentially glorifying it. I see this as a product of raising awareness. As we raise awareness of NSSI, and that's a good thing that we're raising awareness and educating people and helping people get help, then you're going to see these anomalous societal effects. And it's sort of like, as we raise awareness for abuse and gaslighting, the word, or just abuse in general or psychology in general, which is a good thing, right? Raising awareness, education about psychology and relationships and abuse and victimization. Then as a side effect of that, an unfortunate side effect, but one that you just can't get rid of, is that people on the internet, people in society, are going to bastardize the terms thereof, i.e. gaslighting. The fact that anyone even knows what gaslighting is to begin with, even just as a word, is astonishing to me, because I've been using this term and other terms in the field of intimate partner violence for over 25 years, and the public didn't seem to care at all about any of this stuff. Suddenly, the internet knows a lot about this sort of stuff, which is good, and we're raising a lot of awareness, and a lot of people are to get recovered. A lot of people are helping to get out of relationships like this. We're also helping perpetrators to not do this sort of thing. This is all good. But as an unfortunate side effect, you have a lot of people online completely bastardizing the term gaslighting because they learned the basics of it, and then it just became a meme through society. And anyway, so with non-suicidal self-injury, we're raising awareness, we're getting people to help, and as an unfortunate side effect, you have some people that are using NSSI as a marketing tool. They are doing it or acting like they're doing it and trying to get other people to agree that it's not a bad thing, right? There's a justification for it. They will glorify it. They'll say, like, don't listen to the doctors. We love this. And obviously that's not great. And we need to do what we can to protect children and really everyone from this information. And these social media platforms probably have a responsibility around that sort of thing. I would say they have a responsibility around, deleting or getting that sort of content off of their platforms. I don't know what to do about that, but so yeah, that's what I'll say about that. All right, so combing through the document with all the emails, looking for questions I haven't answered recently. We have an email from anonymous patron in Italy. He says, "Hi, Dr. Honda. Whenever I get into a relationship, I become kind of dependent on the other person's presence in my life, especially their warmth. My girlfriend is a doctor and works up to 13 hours per day, and when she gets stressed by working so much, she goes into an autopilot version of herself, and she gets distant and cold with me. I know she loves me and our relationship is not in danger, but the lack of warmth from her puts me in such distress and sorrow that sometimes I reach the point of contemplating suicide. I have never attempted, though. I feel empty, lonely, and I lose interest in everything. I check my phone every minute, hoping for her messages, and I feel like a black hole in my chest that absorbs everything and strangles me. All of this drops as soon as she says something nice to me, for example, that she misses me, or when she apologizes for being so distant. Where can I find inside myself the warmth she can't give me in those moments, if that's what I need?" End of email. Yeah, it's a great question, and I think a lot of people listening right now could relate at least to a part of this. And this is a very important question. You have a lot of self-awareness, a lot of differentiation. Instead of blaming her, which would be the undifferentiated response, like, "You're such a cold person," you're like, well, she's a doctor and she works a lot, and it's normal for her to get kind of stressed out and go into autopilot. And yet I am suffering because I'm alone with my thoughts, and I have a lot of emotional issues with this. So it's good that you have that self-awareness, but the question that you have is a very common question, but the question is misguided. Your question is, how do you find inside yourself the warmth? You can't. None of us can find attachment security alone. So the answer is corrective experiences around making you know that people are there for you. I'm guessing you went through a lot of abandonment or trauma growing up that made you feel as though no one was there for you. And so you don't have that inner resource because you never experienced it externally. The things we have on the inside of us, the resources we have on the inside of us, according to me anyway, are largely dependent on experiences that we went through. We aren't just, like for me, for example, I'm not naturally confident. I wasn't born with the ability to soothe myself when I'm lonely. These are things that I internalized from the outside. Because people attuned to me and made me feel safe, I, over time, eventually internalized that and now just have an inner resource to soothe myself when I feel danger. So you have to experience, you can't find it on the inside. Could you maybe do a little bit along those lines to reassure yourself? Are there cognitions you can participate in? Yeah. But if you're really going to cure yourself, the answer is long-term therapy with a therapist that understands corrective experiences, that understands how to help you with this internalization. And that's the answer. And I know that isn't a great answer, because wouldn't it be nice if I could just give you this little tip? You know, the internet is full of that kind of crap. Like, well, just read a book, or watch a movie, or have a nice meal, or call a friend, or write a song or something. It's like, okay, maybe, but not in my experience. Those things might help a little bit, but the thing that'll really help is if you have, say, a 5 to 10 year intense relationship with a therapist who really helps you to recover from the traumas that you went through. Having said that, anyone in this situation would be hurt. Maybe not to the extent that you are, where you're contemplating suicide, but you know, I go through this with my wife sometimes. She will get stressed out, and you know, Bob talks about this as well with his wife, that when Stacy or Colleen, Bob's wife, when they get stressed out, they kind of shut down, and that it feels distant and cold. And I've learned that about my wife, and know that it's not, I don't take it personally. For a long time I thought, does she actually not like me? But we talked about it, and I differentiated as best I could, and we tried to understand each other as best we could. And over time I've learned, she shuts down. Actually, that's not the only thing she does when she's stressed out, but that is one of the things. And so I do my best to interpret it differently. And for the most part, I succeed at that. But it doesn't take away the loneliness, but I have other things that I can do, right? Well, one, I have my parents that attune to me a lot that I can turn to on the inside. I don't have that black hole inside of me because my parents fulfilled my attachment needs throughout my lifetime. But also, I will turn to other people, other attachments. If it was really bad, I suppose I would go back to therapy, So I know to lean into other people. And that's the impulse I have when I have those moments where I feel neglected and I don't have an avenue to re-engage with Stacy. I engage in other attachments, Bob, Umberto, other people in my life, my parents. I turn to those relationships to soothe me and to make me feel secure, to make me feel grounded, to make me feel accepted and loved, and having that warmth in my life. So there's a possibility that you have a lot of eggs in that one basket, which is your partner, which is probably going to cause a cyclical problem like this because one, there's just a natural ebb and flow to a relationship, even in best of times. But also, since she's a doctor and works up to 13 hours a day, I mean, she's not going to have the capacity. And depending on where she is at in her training, it could literally be 5-10 years of this into the future, maybe even the rest of her career. I mean, some physicians are absolute workaholics along these lines, and there's a lot of culture of that in the medical profession. So, therapy and other attachments is the answer. There's probably not an answer to the question, where can I find in myself to soothe myself? Because you have to internalize it from the outside. And even for me, even though I was raised pretty well, there's no way I could only rely on myself for attachment security and affection and warmth. There's no amount of inner resources that would make it so that I could just be completely emotionally neglected for an extended period of time and feel good about it. All right, let's take a break. When we get back, more emails. All right, we're back from the break. Anonymous patron from Bend, Oregon, she wrote in and says, "Can you be parentified by your mother at the age of 32? End of question. And the answer is, yeah, absolutely. One could be parentified off and on throughout one's life and then have an intensive period of parentification at age 32. Or you could have never been parentified throughout your life and then suddenly be parentified. It's easier to parentify a child, and it's more common, but a parent, for example, could be struggling with something, relational chaos or a medical problem or self-esteem issues, and really rely on a 32-year-old adult child to pick up the pieces, to overfunction for their underfunctioning, and pressure the 32-year-old adult child to do so. And then the 32-year-old child would feel all the negative effects of the parentification, the resentment, the anger, the trapped feeling, the being pushed into a position of over-responsibility, and a lot of self-blame. Parentified kids will self-blame a lot. So yeah, absolutely. It's not common for parentification to come out of nowhere like that, but it happens for sure. All right, next email is from anonymous patron from Germany. She says, "Dear Dr. Kirk, my husband, who is American, is avoidant attached, and I am preoccupied. We can always talk about my feelings. He attends to my needs and has provided a corrective experience for me. However, he can't access his emotions, his own emotions. If you ask him how he's doing, he'll always say that he is just good. His father was diagnosed with terminal cancer. He doesn't talk about it. He barely tries to figure out what his father is doing, even though he often sees his parents. I tried to talk with him about his feelings about his father's diagnosis, as his family doesn't seem to really talk with him about it, but he won't talk. I have kind of given up and just told him that I'm always there for him, but that I don't want to bother him anymore. This lack of communication makes me insecure and starts to make me preoccupied about our relationship. I feel bad talking about my own feelings while he is going through this. How can I help him to talk about his feelings or grief with him? Also, he does not want to go to therapy. P.S. He got my premium subscription last year to the podcast for Christmas, which was a great and thoughtful gift. I love the podcast, learned so much about me and my relationship. Thank you. End of email. Yeah, tough situation. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. You can suggest someone go to therapy, but you can't make them go. You can suggest they talk about their feelings, but you can't make them talk. And the first thing, though, that I'll say is that you're very differentiated. You have a lot of self-awareness and a lot of compassion. That's good. You can use that to your advantage. And you recognize that he is, in all likelihood, having a lot of grief feelings, a lot of worry, a lot of pain or something. And that he doesn't talk about it. He doesn't talk about his family. He doesn't talk about it with himself. He doesn't talk about it with therapists. He doesn't talk about it with you. He doesn't express his emotions. And you're worried about him. So that's good. You feel compassion. You worry that he's going to bust at the seams, which is the worry, right? Alcoholism can develop from that, all sorts of things, physical ailments. The other thing that you're experiencing is that due to your preoccupied attachment, you are distorting this scenario as evidence that he's going to leave you. That's why your preoccupation is becoming triggered, right? You're saying that it's making you wonder, see, where did you say? It makes you preoccupied about the relationship. It starts to make you worry that the relationship is going to come to an end. That is a distortion. That's based on your preoccupation. It's based on your relational traumas. You're transferring onto, you're displacing, you're projecting, you're seeing something based on your description. I can't know, obviously, unless we talk, but based on your description, that's what you're describing. You're describing that you're distorting him shutting down from the pain and the lack of repertoire or lack of habit, lack of know-how, lack of safety. I mean, avoidant people, they don't avoid feelings just because they feel like it. They avoid it because they're terrified. They avoid their feelings because they don't feel safe feeling their feelings. When they were young, when they were 12 months old, 18 months old, they had all the normal feelings, but due to lack of attunement, they were just left on their own to have their feelings. And it felt very unsafe and it felt very lonely to them. And so emotions to them are terrifying, an avenue to get more rejection. It's one thing to be rejected. It's another thing to reach out and then get rejected, right? Like if you are at the dance, at the high school dance, and you have low self-esteem and you think no one wants to dance with you, that's one thing. But if you actually walk across the room and ask someone to dance with you and they shut you down and everyone laughs at you, that's 10 times worse, right? Well, that's the avoidant person. They just sit on the sidelines and they don't ask because they're pretty sure they're going to get rejected. So why ask? And why even go to the dance to begin with? I'll just stay home. That's what avoidant people do. They're sad and lonely and scared of being rejected in the same way that preoccupied people are, but they just express it in a different way, right? It's avoidant. It's attachment insecurity. They're insecure about attachment. And so for these people, it's hard. And it's not an indication that he's going to leave you, though, right? That is your preoccupied voice telling you that it is. Now, what do you do? Well, like I said, you can lead a horse to water. You can't make it drink. So you can't make him be different. And I understand the impulse, and I have that impulse too. I see people that are close to me in my life where I'm just like, there's a better way to do this, and I might try to influence them. But at the end of the day, they have to make a choice, and you can do everything you can to convince them within reason. But if they don't take the bait, then that's just the breaks. That's their life. It's their choice. It's their, they can dig their own grave, so to speak, I suppose. I don't want to be that dark, but they have their own path that they're on, and you just have to accept it. You have to differentiate from that. So like, well, their problem is their problem, and I've done everything I can to help them, but if they don't want that help, then they don't want that. The other thing that I tell myself is, well, what do I know? Maybe this is for the best. And I might tell yourself that same thing, anonymous patron in Germany, is just say, maybe this is best for him. Maybe for him, the best path, given his personality, is to avoid it. And then maybe he'll revisit it in 5 years. I don't know. Maybe or maybe he is visiting it in his mind in his way, and he just doesn't want to share it with me. I don't know. How would I possibly know what's best for him? I know what I would be doing if I were in his shoes, but I can't really know what's best for him. I have my suspicions, but I can't really know the answer. So you want to be careful about drawing firm conclusions. I'm a therapist. I'm pretty pompous about my point of view, and yet when I'm at my best, I will say that to myself with clients or people in my life, or even myself. I'm just like, well, I can't really know what's best here. I just have a guess. The other thing is to maybe do what you've done already and continue to do it, but do it in a way that feels good to you and is non-pressuring, is to tell him how you feel. You're like, it feels weird for me to tell him how I feel, even though I'm trying to make him talk about how he feels. And because this is what I'm this way. I like to level with people. It doesn't always work. I always think it's going to work, but it doesn't always work. But I try to level with people. And so I might, when it seems like it's bubbling up inside of you and it seems like you have the space to talk about it, you just turn to him and you're just like, hey, I just want to tell you that I don't want to pressure you. I don't want to tell you what to do. I don't know what's best for you. I can only take a guess as to what's best for you, but I don't know. But I do know for myself that as I'm watching you and your dad he has terminal cancer. He's going to die. And he's my father-in-law, so I have a lot of feelings about that. And I have a lot of sadness and worry and grief and sorrow about losing him and about his suffering. And it just causes all those feelings. And I have those feelings all the time. And I also am suspicious or I imagine that you have those feelings times 100, because this is your dad. And I worry about your dad because he is dying. And that is got to be an emotional roller coaster. And so that's my observation. That's what I imagine. But what I see is you and your dad, you don't even talk about it seemingly. And I don't know, but I just would imagine that all those feelings are just being bottled up, and it's going to cause a problem. It could cause you to suffer unnecessarily. It could cause you to miss an opportunity to communicate about something that you always wanted to communicate before you died. It could cause you to have physical ailments or sleep problems. And, I don't know. I don't want to presume that about you, but I love you and I worry about you. I love your dad. I worry about him. And I'm just throwing it out there. But you know me, I'm preoccupied. I worry all the time. And sometimes when you do this, and I know this isn't rational, it feels kind of like you're going to leave me, because if you're going to shut down those feelings, it makes me worry that you're going to shut down all your feelings, including your love for me. And I know that's not rational, but I sometimes feel that way sometimes. And so that's why I will get a little moody around you sometimes when I see you doing this. So you can respond to what I'm saying now. You could respond later. You could not respond. I'm not requiring anything of you. And it feels good for me to get this off my chest, but what do you think? And then let's say he just says, I don't know, I'm just trying to get to work, or I'm just, I don't like to talk about that kind of stuff. And then you would say, okay, totally, you're on your path. I'm just going to throw it out there that therapy could help, or talking about your feelings could help, or bonding with your dad in a deeper way, an emotional way, or whatever way the two of you communicate these kinds of things. I don't know. It's just a good opportunity to do that, since he'll be gone soon, in all likelihood, which is horrible to think about. I love you, and I don't want bad things to happen to you emotionally. And, and you might start crying or whatever. And so end of role play. In that you're getting it off your chest. You might be modeling how to emote to him. You might be leading him to water and helping him to see that health lies in him actively grieving in his way. The other possibility, when I talk about the science of grief, is that we understand, actually studying human beings, that they will vacillate between two modes. One is grieving and one is rebuilding. And the rebuilding phase is to not think about the loss and to not feel the feelings and to not reminisce, to not talk about it. And there's a possibility that in his way, he is going to be in a rebuilding phase for a while, and that the grieving phase will start at some point or will emerge in little short bursts or something. So it's hard to know where he's at with that. There's this, one of the things that I would see in my early career when I used to treat kids was parents would drop their kid off and they would say, this kid went through a huge loss recently. Grandma died or dad died or a divorce happened. And this kid refuses to grieve. And so I need you, therapist, to make this kid grieve. They wouldn't phrase it that way, but that's basically what they were saying. And I had a lot of cases like that. And I understand the worry, that a parent would have about a kid. Say dad dies and mom is with kids and mom notices that little Johnny is not grieving and thinks, well, that can't be right, that there's got to be something wrong there. And, well, I'll take him to therapy, and a therapist will make him grieve. It will help him to grieve. And in those situations, I would eventually come to realize that it's not a good idea to force a kid to grieve, right? Now, I might lead them to water, and I might create an environment where grieving might be possible, but people have different needs at different times. And so, for example, it's not uncommon if you're a kid to say, if one of your parents died, it's not uncommon to not really begin grieving in earnest until you're 25, 35 years old or something. Maybe when you actually reach the age of your parent when they died, that's when the grief really kicks in. So there's that. Also, it's not uncommon for kids, when they're given enough of a venue, to fully grieve just like anyone else in the moment, right? To cry and to create and to talk about and reminisce and to obsess and to feel the pain. That's another thing that kids will do. I'm not going to generalize. But anyway, my point is that you just don't really know what's best for him. In your email, it sounds like you know what's best for him. Now, I would agree with you in your speculation that your idea of what's good for him is probably true, but you just can't really know is the point. And you want to have that boundary. You want to give him that space because he deserves it, but also because that might actually help him. Because a classic preoccupied avoidant dynamic is the preoccupied person will feel all the feelings for the system, and the avoidant doesn't have any room to feel feelings because the preoccupied person is taking up all that job responsibility. And the avoidant person will sometimes feel like, well, someone has to be strong, someone has to be rational, so that'll be me. So you don't want to do that. You don't want to have your feelings take over his feelings, his opportunity. Now, he is responsible for his own feelings and his own reactivity, but until he gets treatment, you have to kind of work with what you got. So I don't know. That's my response to that. All right, let's take a break. All right, we're back from the break. Let's do an OPP. These people became patrons all the way back in 2020 and have stayed patrons through thick and thin. We have Charlie and Antonin and Dina and Michelle and Liz and Elise and Cindy and Carl and Snow and Brandy and Caitlin from God knows where. We have Nilea from Great Britain. We have Vicky from Canada, Quebec. We have Sash from Blacklick, Ohio. Blacklick, Ohio. We have Madeline from Seattle. Do I know you, Madeline? We have Ulrika from Stockholm, Sweden. We have Lizard Queen from Philadelphia, PA. We had Advocat from San Diego. We have Roos from Belmont, Massachusetts. We have Marlena from Minnesota, Richmond, Minnesota, annual patron Marlena. We have Sarah from Helsinki in Finland. We have Dan from Norfolk, Virginia. We have Leslie from Hansville, Washington. Good old Hansville, Washington. We have Janny from Denmark. We have upper tier patron Willow from Texas. We have upper tier patron Kat from Rogue River, Oregon. Rogue River, Oregon. I mean, that is just a Netflix drama TV show waiting to happen, right? You just got to have a TV show called Rogue River. And we also have Lee from Columbia, South Carolina. Thank you all for being a patron through thick and thin. All right, this next email is from Kaylee, patron Kaylee from Cleveland. She says, how can I explain to my older family members that I want to create a secure attachment with my child without sounding judgmental of their parenting style? Whenever my 6-year-old cries, I either pick him up or do whatever I need to do in order to calm him down. I believe I am creating a secure attachment with him, but my older relatives often criticize me, saying that I spoil him or he needs to figure it out by himself to become independent. In the past, I've just told them I don't believe in crying it out and left it at that because I don't feel I can eloquently explain attachment theory in a few words without seeming resentful of the way I was raised or that I'm criticizing them. How should I explain this to them, or is it even worth explaining? Hope to hear from you. Thank you, Dr. Honda. End of email. Yeah, this is a great question. I think this happens a lot, but I applaud your efforts, Kaylee, to raise your kid right, and even in the face of judgment and criticism, direct criticism from other people in your family. And yeah, this is a pretty common issue. I don't know what to do, obviously. That is a strategy worth considering of just like, I'm just not going to get into it with them. I'm going to parent my kid the way that I want to. And if they're going to criticize me, I don't know, fuck them, whatever. But so the middle road isn't a very good road either, which is, I think, what most people take, which is that they will very briefly try to explain to people, like, I don't believe in cry it out. That's not going to get it across. If it's possible to attain this, I would consider the following, which is at the end of the road, what we're trying to get to is where they understand what attachment theory is. They understand what good parenting is, not only just for their own edification, but maybe even for their own kids, right? Maybe even for their own relational trauma awareness, right? So it's a tall order, but it could happen. Stranger things have happened in the world. And you would want them to do that so they'd stop criticizing you. The other thing is in all likelihood, you're going to have to rely on them to help you with parenting, right? Now, once the kid gets past a certain age, it becomes less of an issue. But I don't know, it could help, right? It takes a village. At the same time, you don't want to alienate your parents, because if you talk about proper parenting, your parents might reflect on their own style of parenting you, and they could be hurt by that or threatened and maybe get defensive or feel ashamed or something. And it sounds like you don't want that either. So how do you get there? Well, it sounds ridiculous, but why not, right? It just depends on what sort of campaign you're willing to go on. And one of the things you can do is actually have them listen to the Attachment Deep Dive, or I actually have an episode on attachment parenting, actually, that they might be able to listen to, or you get a book or something, or maybe there's some YouTube videos that are short and sweet and you can show them that. Or just sit them down and say, hey, I'm not a professional, but I do know enough about attachment theory and attachment parenting to tell you the following. I'm not going to be super eloquent, but I just want you to listen to me talk for about 15 minutes while I tell you what I've learned and what I'd like to do. And then as you're talking about the principles of it, maybe you jot down a couple bullet points or something. And you say, the reason why I want you to know this is because I want you to be involved in parenting and taking care of my kid. I also don't want you to criticize me anymore. At the very least, I don't want you to look at me and judge me as being a terrible parent, because it's actually a misnomer in our society that to create an independent child, you need to start making them independent at 6 months, which I just have to say, I mean, come on, people. A 6-month-old baby, you're going to turn into an independent creature? I mean, what the fuck? And yeah, you might actually do that by emotionally neglecting a child. You might make them pathologically independent, but they will be like that other person's husband who literally never talks about their emotions and never reaches out and shuts down at every opportunity. So obviously that's not good, right? Anyway, but the other thing that you might want to say or have to say, feel compelled to say, is you say, and I just want to say that overall, you raised me really well. And I think because of the way you were raised by parents that caused too much independence too early, you also raised me in that way. And overall, you raised me great. But if I had one asterisk to your parenting style, it was that you raised me and my siblings to be too independent too early. And I know that was the prevailing wisdom. Almost all parents in the United States parented that way. And I'm not like permanently damaged or anything, but I do walk around with a fair amount of what I believe to be results because of that. I walk around with a fair amount of anxiety. I walk around with a fair amount of low self-esteem. And I believe, and research shows this, according to the experts, that when you properly and fully attune and help a kid up until the age of, say, 2 or 3 years old, then they feel fulfilled. And when you give them that reassurance and that soothing, then they're able to soothe themselves after and actually become more independent. If you want to create an independent child, then you want to tend to their dependence enough when they're very young, such that they don't need you around all the time when they start growing up. That's the idea. Kids who are very clingy and overly dependent on their parents are kids, according to research, that actually experience a lot of inconsistent parenting. So it's not true that tending to a child's needs will make them clingy and dependent. What will make a kid clingy and dependent, which what we call preoccupied attachment or anxious attachment, is when you occasionally attend to their needs and then pull it away and deny them soothing, deny them attunement. That inconsistency seems to result in overly dependent, overly clingy people. So, but if you provide consistent love and attention and soothing, then research shows that person develops what they call secure attachment, which means that they have a healthy balance between dependence and independence. And that's what I'm trying to achieve. And I know it looks a little weird to you, but it's what the science has said. End of role play. You could say something like that. I don't know if it would work, but if you went on a campaign, then maybe it would. And I feel like people give their family members, older family members, a short shrift, that they're incapable of adjusting like this, that they're incapable of learning. I've sat down my parents, I've sat down people in my family and had talks along these lines. I've talked with older people about LGBTQ issues, about what it means to be non-binary, this kind of thing. And I have seen people change. In my family, I've seen people understand more. And now I'm a teacher and I am a yammerer, so maybe I have that strength going for me. And I think I have that role in my family as well. I think that I tend to, people in my family tend to accept the fact that I'm a yammerer, and so they'll indulge me. So I have that benefit, and maybe you don't have that, but people can change if you give them a chance. At the same time, they might not. Like you can lead. The title of today's episode is "You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them be healthy." All right, this next email is from patron Gabriel from Europe. He says, "Dr. Kirk, are you nocebo-ing your deserving listeners?" Just chiming in here. So you have nocebo and you have placebo. So placebo is when you believe something will work and thus it has a greater benefit, a greater treatment benefit. Like if you are given a placebo pill, a sugar pill that is told to you that it's going to cure your anxiety, there is a signal and a well-known phenomenon where just taking a placebo will help people with their anxiety on average, right? So like the way it goes is like they give people, they'll have three groups. They'll be testing out a anti-anxiety medication. And one is an actual anti-anxiety medication that has been shown to work. Another one is a placebo pill. And then the control group is people with anxiety, but you don't give them any medication. And what they find is that the greatest benefit is found in the people that actually took the anti-anxiety medication. But there's a difference between the placebo group and the control group. The placebo group, on average, has a greater reduction in anxiety symptoms than the control group, which shows that if you just tell people that something's going to work, then it has an effect on some people. It can have a large effect on some people. For a lot of people, it has no effect. And research shows that even when you tell people it's a placebo, it still, on average, shows an effect there. Not for everyone, but on average. So even when you tell someone, this is not a real medication, but this is a placebo that's supposed to help you with your depression, for example. And they find that, and not every study finds this, but many studies do. So with a nocebo, it is when it's the opposite. You couldn't give someone so you take different groups of people, you take a control group, and everyone has anxiety that comes in, and you put some people in a control group and you put some people in a group where you give them a medication and you don't say anything about the medication, and then another group and you give them the anti-anxiety medication, but you tell them that this medication probably won't work. And what they find is that the greatest benefit, the greatest change, the greatest symptom reduction in anxiety are those people that were just given the medication. The next group are the people that were given the anti-anxiety medication, but you told them that it wasn't going to work, and then the least amount of benefit happens to the people who didn't get the medication at all. And so that's what nocebo means, right? So Gabriel is saying, Dr. Kirk, are you nocebo-ing your deserving listeners? One thing that I often hear you mention, though, it's the resistance to treatment of certain attachment injuries. I would never put into discussion your knowledge and experience, but as a normie, sometimes I find that these kinds of statements trigger my learned helplessness. I have complex PTSD. So just chiming in here. Yeah, the reason why, let's see, what did you say? You often hear me mention that it's the resistance to treatment of certain attachment injuries. I wouldn't phrase it that way. At least I hope that I didn't say it, because it's not what I believe. My position, my belief, my experience is that there are certain issues in life that we term as psychological issues that take a long time to recover from. And in all likelihood, you're never going to fully recover from it. At best, you're going to recover like 50%. I mean, just look at Bob, for example. He was abused growing up and has disorganized attachment, according to him. And he has a lot of the syndromes of being an abused child. He's in his mid-50s, heading into his late 50s. He's been in therapy for 40 some odd years. He's a therapist himself. He knows all about this kind of stuff. And yet he would say that he's not very far down the road to recovery. So is everyone like that? No, but it's a pretty common story. Does it make it worthless to try? No, of course not. He's benefited, according to him, a lot from the work that he has done. So the reason why I will point things like that out is because I need people to understand the scope at which they are faced with, that they can't just read an article online, or they can't just change their diet, or they can't just take a CBT 10-week course and fix the problem the way that a lot of people in our society seem to believe. I need people to understand what's really happening. It'd be like if someone had diabetes or something, and you're just like, well, all you got to do is exercise, and that could literally cause people to die. And when it comes to this sort of thing, as a responsible clinician, I need people to understand the prognosis. I obviously can't know in every case, but I want to give people the information. Plus, I'm guessing a lot of people benefit when I say that, because they might have been in and out of therapy with the impression that somehow they're a bad client because they haven't recovered fully yet, and they've tried really hard, and they've been to 3 different therapists, and they might have even been blamed by a therapist or 2. And so for me to say it's not your fault, it's just the nature of the problem. It takes a long time, and you have to find the right therapist. And even then, you're not going to fully recover from ongoing horrendous abuse growing up. So a lot of people feel liberated by that. Like, oh, thanks. It's not great to know that, but at least it aligns with my experience, and I can no longer blame myself. I can just say, like, well, this is what everyone goes through when they have this degree of relational traumas in childhood. So that's my position. I think that's what you're referring to. But you say that it triggers your learned helplessness, and I get that. And what's the alternative? That I tell everyone that it's easily fixed? It's a fucking bummer. It's fucking depressing to think about. If I'll just personalize it to Bob, he's a wonderful human being. Y'all know that. And he was massively abused growing up, and he deserves so much better in life. And he's suffering almost all the time. He doesn't talk about it a lot on the podcast, but he does talk about it, but it's no joke. He's suffering a lot on a daily basis, on an hour by hour basis. It's not a walk in the park for him. It's a lot of pain. It's a lot of anxiety. It's a lot of uncertainty. It's a lot of triggering. It's a lot of conflict. It's not an easy life for him. And it's just so unfair. It's just so unfair. Why did I get the parents that I got and he got the parents that he got? Why? He's arguably a better person than I am. Why did he get treated so badly? Why is this his fate? It's depressing. It doesn't make any sense. It's unfair. It's aggravating. And that's real. And so the grief around that is also real. So, it triggers your learned helplessness, but I don't know what you're going through, but it's possible that what you're feeling is just that demoralization that is, I think, just a rational response. Is that the end of the line? No. It's the same when we realize we're all going to die. It's depressing to know that we're all going to die one day. Everything ends, and it's sad. And when we deal with that sadness and face it, and then we break through to the other side, there's another side to it of acknowledging the reality of this, acknowledging the shit, the suffering, and the reality of human life. And so that's my philosophy. I other people obviously can have their own philosophy, but that's mine. And if my philosophy harms you, then, I wouldn't listen to the podcast, I guess. I don't know. Obviously, I'd talk with your therapist about it. Going on. From learning about sports science, I know about the importance of the placebo and nocebo effect on us people. So much so that certain findings suggest it's actually harmful to call certain physical exercises harmful when the evidence doesn't support that. Right. So the research shows that if you are and this isn't my field, but in physical therapy or in training, if you have a coach or a physician that is like, don't quote me on this, but say you have like a knee injury, and there's if you have a physician that says working out or running or heavy activity with your leg, with your knee, is actually going to cause the knee to get worse. And then they take another group, and you tell those people with the same knee injury, randomly assigned control to treatment group, and you tell those people that actually working out will improve their knee. And then they all work out, and the people that you told the working out with the knee, their knee actually physically gets better. You can actually measure the markers of health and of improvement in their knee physically. It's not just psychological. You can actually measure certain things, repair of the knee, signs of repair, and it's different in the person that believed that exercise was going to help their knee when compared to the group of people, on average, when compared to the group of people where you said, go ahead and exercise, but it's going to harm your knee. And don't quote me on that, because obviously this is not my area, so I don't know if that's a specific study, but that's essentially the idea that Gabriel is getting at. He goes on, a study from this year on microdosing psychedelics suggests that the claimed benefits could be attributed to a placebo almost in their entirety. Just chiming in here. Yeah, I've seen a lot of research on that as well going on. And it depends on what they're looking at, but going on here. I am not an expert. I hope this question is not offensive to you. Just chiming in here. It's great that Gabriel knows how thin my skin is and is having all these caveats. I'm not an expert, and I hope this question is not offensive to you. It isn't. But could it be possible that often reminding people how hard certain conditions are to treat makes us even more resistant to treatment, preventing us from harnessing the placebo effect or even potentially nocebo-ing us listeners? I don't think it's ethical to lie, of course, but it would be really interesting to hear your perspective. Thanks for all your work. You changed my life for the better in more ways than I can list here. End of email. Yeah, and I've thought about that. I do contemplate that, not only with y'all as listeners and patrons, but also just my own clients, my students. I think about that sometimes, but I just can't do it. I can't lie. I can't deceive. It's just not, it's so hard for me to do that. And I would rather tell people the truth and take it from there than to obscure what I know to be true and try to remember that I lied, or I don't know. Like it's just never a question for me to do anything like that. I have faith in people that they will be able to navigate it. And like I said, it might be a matter of going through an existential crisis when you really figure it out, or radically accepting the suffering that everyone has in the world, radically accepting the fact that you're never going to fully recover or something. I don't know. The other thing is in my experience, this radical acceptance and this disclosure to people has not caused harm for them. Like I said, there's a lot of liberation in it, and there's a solidarity when we can all collectively agree that life fucking sucks a lot of the times, and it particularly sucks for some people. Then we can talk about it, we can acknowledge it, we can look at it, we can share in it, we can support each other in it, we can be it, we can let it be, we can let it exist. The suffering is there, and we can be with the suffering. And for me and people around me, Bob included, when we do this, he improves. When on the podcast, sometimes after we stop recording, I'll ask him, I'll be like, are you doing okay? Like, how you feeling? And yeah, I guess he could be lying. I don't think he is. He'll say, well, actually, I feel better, even though the conversation led him to a lot of pain. We went in a direction that caused him to recall and to identify with and to feel a lot of pain, to move past the veil of his regular cruising speed psychologically. He goes into it, and it hurts. And some of our conversations can be pretty depressing, pretty demoralizing, right? Things along these lines of just like, geez, fuck, I'm doomed. I'm going to always have this problem. I'm going to always have this reactivity. I'm going to always have this attachment style east to stomach scent throughout the rest of my life. I'm going to always have to cope with it. And it can be demoralizing. It can be depressing. It can be a learned helplessness feeling. I'll ask Bob, how do you feel at the end of that? And he'll say that, number one, he feels better because he talked about it and he lived in it and he was taken care of by me as I'm doing it. He feels closer to me. He feels more inside of his own body. He feels more like he's actually being real and authentic. And although it sucks to recognize how much life sucks, it's better to recognize how much life sucks and live in our own bodies and live in reality and express it and talk about it than to skip along on the surface acting like none of this is happening. And it's a philosophy, it's case by case, but that's the principle that I follow. And I can't recall ever running into a situation where that went wrong, but it is a worthy question. And I'm not there with you as listeners regarding this. If you find that the material that we talk about is depressing to you, or is triggering to you, or is demoralizing to you in a way that isn't helpful, or you don't have any guidance to move through that demoralization, then yeah, I wouldn't listen, or I would definitely talk with a therapist about this, because these are important questions that you deserve to explore. And I'm not there to monitor it. I am there to monitor Bob. I'm there to not monitor Bob. I don't monitor my friend, but I'm there to ask questions and to listen. I'm there with my clients. Obviously, I'm there with my students. I'm there with people in my personal life. So I can react, maybe pull back a little bit on the demoralization talk, right? Or maybe hug them. And actually, with you, the listeners, if you're left in demoralization, I'm not there to hug you. I'm not there to take care of you. I'm not there to be with you. I'm not there to cry with you. And that could be bad. I have read many emails from people saying that even though we're not there with you, me and Bob or whoever, that you feel our presence, emotionally speaking. So it is kind of like a podcast hug or something. But, but you have to monitor that for yourself. And I suppose I should occasionally remind people about that. And your email, Gabriel, reminds me that I probably should do that more often. I suppose, let me know if this is an issue for you, because obviously this is of a high priority for me, that if the podcast is affecting you negatively somehow in this way, I would really want to know that so that I could change what I'm doing to account for that somehow, or advise people to do this or that. So, let me know, email in, please. And let's have one big podcast hug. Consensual podcast hug. Consensual for those who want one, in a consensual, non-creepy way. It's just so funny how we have to have all these caveats now. But, it's good modeling. Consensual podcast hug. My arms are out. Reach out your arms, even if you're on the bus. Or if you have your earbuds in, your partners, hug them, or your kid or your dog. Let's all just hug it out. I can feel your energy as you hug your dog and your kid, and you're hugging the air just like me. And take care of yourself, because you deserve it. You really, really do.